Hey everyone, it's Anne. So maybe you notice my voice sounds a little ridiculous. It's because I just got back from my 20-year college reunion and I didn't stop talking for 3 days straight. So thank you for tolerating. The entire episode is not going to sound like this, just a couple parts where we insert some extra stuff in. But thank you so much for listening and for tolerating my going back to my glory days in college. Also, today's full episode is free for everyone. There are no ads, and you'll get the whole Ask Anne Anything part of the show. The question we answer in that part legitimately almost stumped me, so I can't wait to hear what your answer is in the comments. And as always, we're so grateful to all of our paid subscribers. You make this show possible. We divide all the money that we make equally between me and Melody, and right now we've made enough to pay Melody all the way through December. But if we don't get more subscribers, we can't continue making the show. So if you want this show to continue, go to culturestudypod.substack.com and subscribe today. Okay, on with the show.
This is a corkboard of a lot of Post-it notes I made that are connected by, I didn't have any red string on hand, so it's connected by...
Is it like washi tape? That's what it looks like.
Yes. And thumbtacks. And let's see if I can start from the top. We've got Gloria Steinem is a CIA operative. To the FBI sabotage the women's lib movement. And of course, the women's lib movement takes us to TERFs. And then TERFs takes us to Joan Rivers being murdered by the deep state. And Joan Rivers connects to the Obamas because, of course, it was the Obama deep state that, I'll just say, did not kill Joan Rivers, but according to the conspiracy theory, did. And the Obamas take us to birthers. I mean, it goes on and on from there. We've got a Post-it for Beyonce faking her pregnancy, Chrissy Teigen eats babies, elite child pedo rings, adrenochrome. LOL dolls. I don't even know if those are still around, but those LOL dolls, if you drop them in cold water, they did something sexual, allegedly. Cabbage Patch dolls being satanic, going back to some classic 1980s satanic panic, which intersects with my own childhood. So yeah, it's a fun time.
This is the Culture Study Podcast, and I'm Anne Helen Peterson.
And I'm Kristen Conger, the host of the podcasts Unladylike and most recently, Conspiracy, She Wrote.
Okay, so that was a great visual description of your corkboard, but why did you make it?
So I am, maybe ironically for a podcaster, I'm a very visual learner. And Conspiracy, She Wrote, as a concept, kind of started on this corkboard because I was trying to map out the red strings of women and gender in kind of contemporary conspiracy theory culture.
How do all of these relate to one another?
Yes. I was also trying to understand, at the time, this was still kind of peak QAnon. And I was trying to understand its basics of okay, so we've got deep state stuff over here, and then all of this adrenochrome, child trafficking, blood sacrifice. Oh, turns out that's old school anti-Semitic blood libel mythology. There's a lot of nativism that then connects back to American histories of white people coming up with all these conspiratorial tales about how Native Americans were going to steal away their girls and women. Just kind of trying to connect past and present, but again, through just absurdity, which are conspiracy theories.
Melody says that we can't chit-chat much because we have a lot of really good questions. But I do want to ask you before we start, what is your favorite conspiracy theory. And this isn't to trivialize like the various people who are harmed by conspiracy theories, like all of the different prejudices and that sort of things. But like there has to be one that you're like, yeah, that kind of hits me in my pleasure centers of like where I like to think conspiratorially.
Oh, well, okay. So my favorite is one that I do not subscribe to it whatsoever. But it's the one that kind of blew my mind the most in terms of its intensity. And that is Meghan Markle pregnancy truthers.
Yeah.
Oh, you're familiar.
It's very similar to my favorite conspiracy theory, which is that Katie Holmes was pregnant with a Scientology alien.
I haven't heard that one.
Well, that's old school, like Perez Hilton style gossip from the 2000s, where like part of the way that it perpetuated itself was through people who found it like so ridiculous that it was entertaining.
Exactly.
Right? But then there are people who are like, no, but really, what if, and maybe it's not an alien, right? But maybe there is like a larger conspiracy to like give Tom Cruise a biological child, like blah, blah, blah. But yes, similar. So like anything that's truther about like fake pregnancies, I'm like, why would someone do that? Why would they go through that? That is just a lot.
Yeah. Having watched too many YouTube videos of it's usually women, alleging that Meghan Markle's children are actually dolls. Like it was just such an unexpected world to find myself in. But I will quickly mention in terms of one that I like to just mentally engage with because it's kind of fun and way more low stakes than like truly people coming for Meghan Markle. Give her a break.
Yes.
I love a lookalike conspiracy theory.
Yes.
So you have, Katy Perry is grown-up JonBenet Ramsey.
Yes.
But my
Love it.
But my
Love
favorite, I think, is Taylor Swift is some kind of clone of Anton LaVey's daughter. Anton LaVey, the founder of the Church of Satan. His daughter, who was also recently on the Jordan Peterson podcast. So sorry to hear that.
A clone?
A clone. Because back in the day when she was, I guess, Taylor Swift's age, she was blonde, fair-skinned, wore a red lip, and it's kind of enough for people to say, oh my God, twins.
Amazing. Okay, so for definitional purposes, what makes something a conspiracy theory and not just like gossip?
Great question. The way that I think about conspiracy theories is kind of breaking it down more into conspiratorial thinking. And it's 3 key ingredients. Everything is connected. Accidents don't happen. And nothing is as it seems. And through that pathway, you get to the conspiracy theory itself, which is usually something along the lines of some kind of powerful figure or group is doing something sinister behind the scenes to orchestrate real world chaos and tragedy.
Okay. I think this is going to be very useful as we go into our questions because we have a lot of questions about why certain people are often more susceptible to conspiracy theories. And I think that that's going to be a useful framework. So we have 3 buckets of questions today. And we're going to start with the first bucket, which is about women and conspiracy theories, which is your specialty. And then we'll get into some of the why behind conspiracy theories. And then we'll do a couple explainers on a few choice theories. And today's Ask Ann Anything will be answering a question about how to respond when people in your life start earnestly talking to you about conspiracy theories. But let's get into it. So first, we're going to start with a very recent conspiracy theory that went mainstream. The person who submitted this question wants to stay anonymous, so Melody's going to read it.
The Kate Middleton conspiracy theories from earlier this year took off amongst my friend group like nothing I've ever seen before. People that have never engaged with these sorts of things were sending me non-stop conspiracy memes, even when I made it pretty clear that I found them weird and distasteful. The intersection of conspiracy and real-life domestic thriller, a la Gone Girl or Girl on the Train, etc., seems to have really ignited something in women. Is this the logical next step from our cultural obsession with true crime/domestic crime?
Wow, so much there. Lots to talk about. But I think before we get into this broader theory, which I think is really, really interesting, and I've never heard someone exactly connect those dots, but why do we think that the Kate Middleton saga why did so many people latch onto it? What are your thoughts?
Well, anytime we're talking about the royal family, things get pretty conspiratorial pretty quickly. Just given the stakes, given the way that, each individual palace kind of has its own PR team and media operation. So they're not really working in concert. There's a lot of kind of competition even between the palaces for how they deal with the press and how they get covered in the press. And the UK media system and tabloid system is also just very conspiratorial in a way. There's more room in its libel laws for not outright conspiracy theorizing, but lots of read between the lines. Lots of loaded ellipses,
Yes.
The thing about Kate Middleton is I experienced the exact same thing Alexander did. And it was perfectly timed because I was actually reporting out a Meghan Markle episode as hashtag Where is Kate was bubbling up. So I got to interview Royals reporter Ellie Hall, who's fantastic, to get her actual inside scoop and perspective on it. So my friends were coming to me to explain things. And in a way, I don't so much blame the Gone Girl true crime, women obsessed with true crime culture so much for pushing it mainstream as what Kensington Palace did. Because it was Kensington Palace telling the media that an update on Kate's whereabouts were forthcoming and kind of holding them at bay for as long as they could. And then we get the photoshopped Instagram post.
Oh my God, yes.
And
that's what's responsible for it, I think.
Yes, because
the explosion.
As soon as you had wire services having to print retractions, that was when it burst way beyond anyone even interested in royals or William, Kate. My father, my boomer, white boomer dad, could touch down on that. He's kind of a baseline for me. That's when it really became mainstream news. And then, of course, you also have a generation of women at this age who grew up. I remember where I was when I watched, legit. I remember sitting and watching Diana's funeral. I still have my commemorative People magazine with young Prince William on the cover, who I was convinced I would marry because he and I are both left-handed, Anne, and that was really, I thought, what it would take.
I'm also left-handed.
Oh, really?
Wow. Yeah, great.
I'm glad I didn't
we'll all
find
get
out
married
back then.
together.
Yeah. So it was kind of a perfect storm for this thing to go as viral as it did. I also think the kind of cultural conditions of your true crime, domestic kind of Gone Girl dramas that have really captivated a lot of people, just energizing it even more.
Yeah. Well, and I think the backdrop of the success of The Crown and the idea that women within the monarchy do not have control over their own destinies, right?
Yeah.
Made it easy to map some of these theories onto what was happening. So in my mind, you have the information vacuum.
Yes.
That is then filled by all of this knowledge that we have about how the firm, as it's called, has operated historically, right? And so it makes total sense. You would not have similar conspiracy theories happening around a different, I don't know, say like a president or something. Although there are similar conspiracy theories around the monarchy in Monaco. I don't know where that is right now, but historically there was a lot of like, she was very unhappy. Not that she was like disappearing, but just that like she had been wed off outside of her control. But I think that you have that perfect mix of not enough information to satisfy people, and then a whole lot of information that people can like plug in to come up with various theories of what is actually happening. And also, the other thing I will say is that I think that the reason you had so many people who are not usually conspiratorial minded participating in this is that we are in a nadir of celebrity gossip and celebrity information, and there are very few celebrities who feel like global or even national touchstones, right? And so instead, like what was happening felt like something to talk about. This was also, we have to remember, this is like the depth of winter.
Right.
Nothing else is going on. And I don't think that you can discount the ways that conspiracy theories explode when there is not. Either during moments of anxiety, certainly, but also moments of like tedium and boredom. Okay, correction, not the depth of winter. The worst part of winter, the Ides of March, was when a lot of this went down. Okay.
Another piece of this, too, that also jives with just kind of conspiracy templates, because a lot of conspiracy theories, as kind of wild as the details are, they're often, hew to particular kinds of formats and genres. And on the other side now of the Kate Middleton, PR fiasco, where now we know where she was, and we know that she was away taking care of her health.
Yeah.
Celebrities kind of disappearing from public eye. There's a ton more that we could say just about like female public celebrities disappearing from public eye. That's often a space too when, just random celebrities will constantly get death hoaxed if they just aren't seen regularly enough. So Avril Lavigne, I think, the fandom conspiracy theory about her that she has had to live down now since the early 2000s is that she died and was replaced while she was recording her second album. And it kept recirculating every few years. And kind of the worst time that it really spiraled out of control was when she had taken off a significant amount of time because come to find out, she was treating like chronic Lyme disease.
Right.
And like had to be away. But imagine you were taking some time for yourself. You are seeking medical treatment, taking care of your health. And at the same time, your most committed diehard stans have started a change.org petition to get a proof of life from you to prove that you, Avril Lavigne, are not actually a lookalike named Melissa Vandella. Like, that's where it starts to get so wild.
Yeah, it's like these narratives fill that vacuum.
Exactly.
Right? Because she wasn't giving information about what was happening.
Right.
And there is this expectation now for celebrity transparency.
And we still haven't gotten a ton of information, but I do think it's notable that once she published the video, Kate Middleton, it really shut things down. I mean, of course, there's still people, like the top comment last time I looked at that video on X, the very first comment is this AI? It's both new and not new.
Okay, next question is about your sweet spot, and it comes from Anna.
Why do conspiracy theories seem to flourish more among communities of women than among men? I've personally wondered if it begins when women first become mothers and fear drives them to buy not just every safety lock, but to obsessively read product labels and then from there enter the world of conspiracy theories by way of non-toxic, anti-vax, anti-big pharma, social accounts, businesses, and the like. Is it more than that, or is it less? Because fact remains, men can be conspiracy theorists too. Take, for example, professional conspiracy theorist Alex Jones, who has profited off of women and men with his hyper-masculine marketing of very sketchy supplements and survival kits.
All right, I have a theory, but I want to hear yours first.
So I want to clarify that it's not that conspiracy theories flourish more among women. Yeah. They flourish differently, and I think up until quite recently have gone very much overlooked. Whereas, yes, in the conspiracy space, the people who have, been monetizing it for, since the 90s, really, are your Alex Joneses, your David Icks, I think is how you pronounce his last name. It is a very, Joe Rogan,
Yeah.
These are can be very male-dominated spaces, but there's also kind of the whole wellness, conspirituality space where you tend to find a lot more women. And yes, anything that is attached to motherhood and parenting is understandably appealing to plenty of women. I mean, and I think that's something that Pastel QAnon just really laid bare.
Yeah.
What's your theory, Anne?
Okay. So my theory is two-part. Well, one is that, you take and we're going to talk a lot more about this, I'm sure, over the course of the episode, but, no longer having trust in public institutions, right? Including public health and parenting institutions, and not necessarily having the sort of trusted wisdom from your community group or your parents or whatever it is, means that you are more susceptible to conspiratorial thinking when it comes to things that are happening to your kids, I think. There's just a big fear. So that's part of it. But my bigger thing with women and conspiracy theories is patriarchy, right? You're what are all the forces at work that make it so that the wage gap persists? All of these different things, right? And how do you explain it? How do you explain the endurance of the patriarchy? You have to come up with big, wild theories. Otherwise, it's just men think that they're better than us. I just, you know what I mean?
Yes.
I think that is a larger kind of exploding brain theory of it, but that's what I think makes us women in general, more susceptible to this sort of thinking. How else do you explain it?
Yeah, I mean, and they're relatively early on, as I started researching, when I was back in my corkboard days, I definitely had to pause for a minute and think wait a second. Patriarchy, feminism, hang on. Am I a conspiracy theorist? And it's not a coincidence in right-wing political conspiracy theories that feminists are often the go-to target of conspiracy theories. We are, of course, handmaids of the New World Order.
Right.
But
right. Well, and this is interesting, right, too, because I think that if you are really engaged in feminist politics, then you can look at the world and think ideologically, the reason things are the way that they are, they feel so intractable, is because of systems like white supremacy or patriarchy. But if you're not used to thinking sociologically like that, then you have to have a different paradigm for why the world is the way that it is.
And a theme that I will probably reiterate in our conversation is that conspiracy theories are all about emotions. The reason we get so invested in them is because, yes, there is a pleasure aspect of it. And it's also, they are kind of inherently emotional spaces. We're talking about binary, good versus evil, right versus wrong. It's a very stark kind of worldview. And just to go back to Anna's question and the motherhood piece, this is something that Annie Kelly, who is a longtime anti-feminism and online extremism researcher, has uncovered, especially around pastel QAnon and anti-vax moms. She was talking to me about spending time inside of an anti-vax mom Facebook group. And she was surprised to find herself, not empathizing with their, anti-vax stances, but the kinds of stories that women would start sharing about kind of what led them to the spaces often had to do with how they were treated during the pregnancy and childbirth experience, and also feeling like, okay, and as soon as I delivered that baby, no one cared about me anymore, and medical gaslighting. I mean, that's on Unladylike, that is a constant theme. And that was a light bulb moment for her of saying, okay, you can't just write everyone off as tinfoil hat nuts. Like, we have to go back to what the actual kernels of truth that are then leading people down these rabbit holes.
Yeah, and when people don't believe what you are telling them about your own pain, your own body, your kid's pain, like, you have to come up with another framework to explain what's going on there, because otherwise it's just like you said, medical gaslighting. I was just reading this great book about the history of the cesarean, and there's just all of this trauma amongst women who have like felt their cesareans, and that doctors like either don't believe them or discount their pain and all those sort of thing. And like, I can see how if you're dealing with the aftermath of like this traumatic medical event, that you'd be like, oh, maybe they want me to feel this pain, or maybe there's a larger like organization at work that is trying to get women to have cesareans, right? Like, there's just so many different directions you can go when you're trying to grapple with that sort of thing and people aren't taking you seriously. Okay, so we should transition to our next question, which comes from Claire.
My mother has gotten into conspiracy theories just for fun. I think it's a slippery slope, but she insists it's just fun to think about aliens building the pyramids. Is there a healthy way to indulge in conspiracy thinking?
Kristen, what do you think?
I mean, honestly, Claire, I want to know more about your mom. And when she says just for fun, is this because she's been talking, about aliens building like pyramids for 2 straight hours? And, like what is the degree of this just for fun?
Well, and I think of something like the pleasure in reading the Da Vinci Code, right?
Yes.
It's like, wow, what other secret is there, right? Like, that's fun. It's an adventure story.
Like, the first thing that comes to mind for me personally, and like my own media consumption habits, is I consume way too much Bravo content. Too many housewives. I know too much, Anne.
But it's melodrama. It's just gossip.
Yes,
like, it's just
yes.
a story. There's nothing right or wrong about it.
I also have kind of boundaries with it where I'm not in comments engaging. When Scandival happened, like, I let my podcast friends tell me about it in my ears, but I'm not spending a lot of time going down Reddit rabbit holes and things like that. Like, it's not the conspiracy theory itself or finding entertainment in that is unhealthy. It's kind of what purpose it's serving for you, and then what you choose to do with that information. Like, if Claire's mom is just enjoying watching, binging Ancient Aliens on the weekends, okay. But if your mom suddenly is like posting on Facebook, because it's going to be Facebook, all about those alien pyramids, it's like that's when it starts to kind of like take over more, then maybe there's cause for concern. The more people that I talk to who have been studying conspiracy theories and their kind of media ecosystems and the beliefs and how they work, something that I've heard over and over and over again is basically like, we don't need to be just like afraid of all of this stuff. Mm-hmm. Like, are we living in a very conspiracy-pilled moment? Yes. Is that great? No. But it didn't come out of nowhere. It's not this all of a sudden kind of thing. And for me, at least, like, really, once you start to contextualize some of this, it at least takes like the immediate panic level down a smidge.
Yeah. I agree. I think like seeing, okay, so what do they, like, is this entertainment value? Like, is it actually something that they're like, this is funny, like, this is interesting for me to think about? Or is it something that is affecting the way that I view the world and the way that I trust public institutions? Like, how does believing that like the moon landing was staged transform into the election was stolen. Like, those are the ways that you have to think about, like, have we reached that point, or is it still like, I kind of don't trust the government, which it's healthy to have a moderate distrust of the government, I think.
Yes.
But yeah. Okay. Those words came out of my mouth, and I was like, I do believe that. Like, I was like, is that controversial? I was like, but I do believe that. I believe that, like, we should be questioning and interrogating the way that the government works. All right. So next question is about the appropriate ways to engage in conspiracy theories. This is another question from Anna, who submitted 2 really good questions. This is very rare, but, when you do a really good question, they can do it.
In today's climate, calling somebody a conspiracy theorist is a top-tier takedown, especially when in reference to a public figure. With it being such a loaded label, how can we balance questioning status quos and being curious or open-minded with reason? In other words, can we be curious or fringe without being a conspiracy theorist? And is there a chance that openness to hearing out people's theories might make conspiracy theorist tribes less powerful because there might be less social rejection driving people into their arms?
Great question, Anna. And also, I teed that up really well without even realizing it. So, Kristen, what do you think of this question?
Okay, so how can we balance questioning status quos and being curious? I mean, this kind of goes back to what I'm saying about, like, we don't have to be afraid of these things necessarily. Being called a conspiracy theorist is, absolutely a pejorative. But the fact of the matter is we can still operate and ask questions from, like, a grounded, connected to reality kind of place.
Right. So give me an example of, like, what that looks like.
Okay, let's go to Where is Kate?
Yeah.
I think that it's acceptable and not at all fringe to look at an institution like the monarchy, the firm, understanding its, kind of general machinations in terms of the image that it needs to present versus, like, whatever might be happening behind the scenes. It's perfectly rational to look at that and say, maybe what Kensington Palace or Buckingham Palace, whatever palace it might be, maybe the palace is not exactly saying what's going on. And I don't think that that's a fringe space to go. I think once you start questioning everything, going back to those 3 key ingredients of, accidents don't happen. Nothing is as it seems. Everything is connected. When the entire worldview is starting to look, uncanny valley, I think that's when it starts getting into the fringe. A moment that I experienced recently where I caught myself in that, 3-ingredient conspiracy thinking soup was the day that the attempted Trump assassination happened.
Oh, right.
I was out to dinner with my husband and a couple folks, and we got back in our cars after dinner and, like, checked our phones and, like, oh, and I just saw the photo first, the fist up photo, and my immediate thought was, oh, well, this looks staged. I went there. Like, that was my immediate place of, like, oh.
Well, because Trump is a liar who lies about everything.
Yes.
So that is not, like, an unsubstantiated theory.
Yes. And the optics of it, like, it just seemed, and the timing is too perfect. It's all too good to be true for him.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized I was doing the thing that that I've been researching, for years now. And that's when I remembered, okay, wait, Occam's razor, very helpful to shave with in those kinds of moments, because it's like, all right, so either there was some kind of setup where this random kid was on a roof at a rally and managed to just shave, just nick an ear. Trump was willing to get shot, but not too shot, is it either
not too shot? Yes.
Either this whole scenario with all these individual players and parts, like everything had to work out exactly as planned, or what is far likelier, in a country where we have way too many guns and young white men committing way too many mass shootings, like what the news is telling me happened probably happened.
At the same time, I also want to legitimize our immediate reaction to thinking maybe this was in part staged because of what we know about him and his campaign and everyone that he surrounds himself with, right? But when then many journalistic sources are reporting that this is not the case, then I think that that's where you can be like, oh, okay, I understand why my mind went the way that it did. But I will say that one thing that I find really interesting about my own reaction to things is because I've studied the history of stardom for so long, anytime I see things happening around a public figure or a celebrity, I immediately interrogate. I'm like, okay, so what was going on with their publicist? How did they think about this? You know, what images are they releasing and how did they think about the staging of these images? What paparazzi did they tip off? Like, what we see of a celebrity or a politician is always the tip of the iceberg. And so sometimes it's interesting to approach public events from that viewpoint of being like, well, there was a whole lot else going on that we didn't see, or even like Biden dropping out of the race. We can all understand that there was a lot of things happening behind closed doors that we may or may not ever know, and not think that it's a conspiracy. Like, there's a fine line, right, between like understanding that there is organizational scheming.
Yes.
And that's different than everything. We can't trust anything.
Right. And that it's some kind of nefarious plot.
Right. And with like, when I think about it with stars, like, yes, a lot of it is manufactured and a lot of gossip is placed and a lot of paparazzi is staged. But then you still have the authentic star who is at the core of it. So even if like some of their hobbies might be made up, or like, you know, they were told what to say in an interview, or they're faking a romance, all things that have happened in the past and continue into the present, they're still ultimately a person. And like, you can't totally fake a personality.
And I think too that, you know, with the Trump example, yes, my mind was spinning for a hot minute, but I wasn't hopping on and like I did not then broadcast all of my you know, hot takes in that moment, because I knew it was unnecessary.
Okay, so our next two questions are about the forces at work in conspiracy theories, and this first question comes from Erin.
I work for a 178-year-old educational and research institution. There are some really yucky conspiracy theories about what we're supposedly hiding in our vaults. People like to yell at us on social media to finally reveal the truth, and it seems to flare up worse around election time. Is there some entity intentionally pushing harder on these conspiracies ahead of Election Day? How and why? Is it the conspiracists' anxiety flaring up?
This is like a conspiracy theory around conspiracy theories. What do you think is going on here?
I think that I'm not surprised to hear that it intensifies around elections. Conspiracy theories and any kind of conflicted event, which I think a very intense presidential election like this one counts. Any kind of major event like that is going to gin up conspiracy theories. So that's a baseline. As far as an entity, no, I don't think that there is like one entity. It's a bunch of them, because there is a whole kind of MAGA right-wing media ecosystem that has made partly like a business out of perpetuating this kind of stuff. And it also makes me curious about like what kinds of platforms you're talking about specifically, because now it's like if you're on X, like if we're talking about a conspiracy theory on X, it's so like dark web, MAGA, conspiracy pilled over there that it's kind of another world. And I think that there might be concerted efforts in the sense of like trolls maybe coming more en masse. But I just think that if you are an institution like this, that is constantly, like, for years and years, decades, has been the subject of conspiracy theories. Like, these things just get recycled over and over again.
Right.
So, unfortunately, like, if you're there, the conspiracy theories will inevitably come.
Well, and this is why I also think that more and more institutions are either like significantly moderating or turning off comments on places like Facebook because they want to publicize like, oh, here's what we have in our archive. Like, you know, like publicizing the archive is something that is like a really important and cool thing to do. But at the same time, you are also creating a venue for those conspiracy theories to be publicized. Right? Like maybe someone never heard that that was even something that you could think about what was in the vault until they read it in a comment on a random Facebook page that surfaced on their page because like they follow some other local historical organization. So it's worth thinking about how these theories are disseminated too, like just like the visibility. Mm-hmm. Whereas before it was like, you know, old like pamphlets that would circulate, right? Or like talk radio, things that were not part of the record in how we think about like, oh, here's a Facebook page where I see this theory surface every single time we post something.
And that's why, you know, concern about, oh my God, are we all conspiracy theorists now? Like what has happened to our society? That kind of fear also makes a lot of sense because the basis of a lot of it is not new at all, but the speed at which things spread and can be created and can be ingested is just, that's kind of what's out of control and makes it feel as if it's overtaken everything.
Yeah. Okay, our next question is about the forces behind conspiracy theories, and it comes from Leslie.
Could you discuss a bit of the history of the connection between conspiracy theories and anti-Semitism? For example, 1930s Germany through Marjorie Taylor Greene and Jewish space lasers.
Yes. Women are essential to that particular history. And this is something that I unpack in the first episode of Conspiracy She Wrote. And it is specifically, it focuses in on this woman named Nesta Webster, who was a trailblazer in a way who deserves no celebrating. Because this is almost exactly 100 years ago, after World War I, in the lead up to World War II, this woman, Nesta Webster, is a British aristocrat who is like mildly interested in women's suffrage, but she's also smart enough to know that like women only getting the vote is not going to do like all that much, you know, to really like level the playing field. She didn't want to get married initially, so she like went on an eat, pray, love trip around the world. Like in some ways, she almost could have been like taken another path and become, you know, like a gender studies professor. Not that those existed back then, but what then ends up happening is she gets married to a rich dude. She has some kids, and she begins a writing career as a historian focused in really around the French Revolution. And she publishes a couple of books, and they're very well received. She has, the books are like reprinted. It's all fine, well, and good. Nesta, though, long story short, gets her hands on some old school Illuminati conspiracy theory literature. And the whole Illuminati lore began post-French Revolution, when the aristocracy is like looking at the ruins and saying like, how could this happen? All of these nobodies rising up and taking over. There must have been someone helping, a secret cabal, if you will. And that is where secret societies and the Illuminati specifically first become conspiracy theorized. Nesta gets her hands on this because she's obsessed with the French Revolution from an historical perspective. But then things take a turn, and she starts to believe that she's the reincarnation of a French aristocrat who lived through the revolution. really strongly identifies with this. And her next book is basically about that. She starts to write about how she has discovered that everything written in history books is false, and come to find out there has been this whole Illuminati plot that has been puppet mastering, history as we know it. And what's fascinating is, well, one, what she brings into the Illuminati mix at that point is Protocols of the Elders of Zion and anti-Semitism. So she shifts it from, the secret society that's really just kind of interested in more Enlightenment intellectualism, and adds to that, and also the Jews.
Right. Which was rampant in that section of society at that time.
Absolutely. And some of it also was spread through like women's salons and, these groups, kind of word of mouth. And the book that she publishes about this ends her reputation. She loses all public credibility. And this is something that we've seen before. It reminds me of Naomi Wolf and her pivot, because Nesta Webster becomes so outraged that people don't respect her like anti-Semitic Illuminati mongering, that she just digs in further. And she's just a full-blown fascist. And the book that she writes ends up, infiltrating right-wing American politics, evangelical Christian fundamentalism, like all of this stuff that would then bubble up in the wake of the Cold War in the U.S. So we have, it's really the anti-Semitic stuff is baked in from the jump. And I was just fascinated to learn that, oh my God, and it was this woman cooking up some of this stuff with help from some other women who were just, connecting all kinds of dots because they didn't have jobs. They had the time. But it took them years to do this. Whereas, if they were just online today, like they'd probably have, honestly, like a Substack empire, let's be honest.
Within a couple of weeks, they just have...
They'd be right
But
at
it
home.
does... but what... I wonder, though, too, like, why is it that if you scratch any conspiracy theory, like if you just go a little bit deeper, then the anti-Semitism emerges? Like, why is that like the epidermal layer of all of these? Do you know what I mean?
Yes. I think because it is baked into Illuminati conspiracy theories. Yeah. Because Illuminati is really just like one term for this idea of, New World Order or elite cabals, the Hollywood cabal. Like, it's all roads eventually lead back to this same stuff, these same dots that people have been attempting to connect for a century plus.
Which is rooted in all of like the old tropes of anti-Semitism about like money, and it's baked into all of it.
Yeah. And that is where it starts to get slippery slope of like, I think it is helpful for people eyes wide open to understand, even if we're talking about like Illuminati, celebrity rumors that seem very trivial. Yeah. We still got to know where that stuff is eventually going to take you.
Right. Okay, to wrap it up, we're gonna talk a little bit about a conspiracy theory that has swept through, as you said, like pastel QAnon, like a lot of different Facebook groups that I know people are part of. Like, it's just everywhere. So this specific theory comes from a different listener named Anna, and Melanie's going to read it.
What is the deal with the fixation on sex trafficking by conservatives and suburban dwellers? As a white woman in the suburbs of a red state, I am flabbergasted by how often I am fed stories of child abductions in parking lots or bigger sex trafficking networks. I see it covered often by my conservative friends. I am in no way minimizing the horrific nature of sex trafficking, but it seems disproportionately reported and focused on by the ultra-conservative and evangelical groups.
Well, and there's also all of this like symbolism, like, oh, if you see one of my favorite TikToks is like this woman who walks out of her house and like points at a car with a bumper sticker for like, I don't know, Taylor Swift or like a school baseball team. And it's like sex trafficking, right? Like, so you see the signs everywhere once you start to look for it. And okay, I think that there's that Jeffrey Epstein of it all, combined with QAnon, combined with like incredible fears about the future of children that probably have a lot more to do with climate change and public health and mass shootings than anything to do with child sex trafficking. But like they consolidate onto the idea of like, what if my kid gets abducted and sex trafficked? That's my constellation.
I also think, in the context of Epstein and QAnon, I think that there's also a piece, too, of the Me Too movement kind of being warped and weaponized to feed it as well. But the thing with the sex trafficking and pedo panic, like I honestly could do a whole separate season just on that because it runs so deep and has been relied on for ages now by like reactionary right wingers and more like evangelical groups to essentially like make people afraid. Yes. And it is an age old way of getting people scared about the other. Who
Indifferent.
is waiting? Yes. You are in danger. And there is still like the animating force of white women's purity and like sexual safety, all of that is still extremely potent. And if we look back in history, going back all the way, to the 1830s, there was massive like anti-Catholic conspiracism in the United States because you had a lot of immigration from Ireland at the time, a lot of Catholicism coming into the U.S., and Protestants were working overtime to spin that into some kind of plot that basically the Pope was, trying to take over. And one example of this that to me resonates a lot with, the same kind of sex trafficking conspiracism today is a book called The Awful Disclosures of Maria Monk that came out in 1836. Don't read it. It's a total fabrication. But this book was kind of the alleged story of this woman who, a real woman who was, as they put it back in the day, an unwed mother. And she was pregnant because, according to this book, she had been sent away to a convent. And all of the priests, it turns out, it was like, kind of like a QAnon hellscape of all of these priests and sexual abuse and awful things happening at nunneries. There was, in fact, like a convent, like girls' school outside of Boston that was burned down around then because people were convinced, almost Pizzagate style, that that nunneries were, defiling all of these young women. And that book, obscure as it is today, was, I think, bestseller on the level of Uncle Tom's Cabin. And fast forwarding to like the progressive era, we get the passage of the Mann Act and this whole obsession with so-called white slavery. And anytime you have these moments of like mass immigration, and these like nativist fears coming up, you often have with that some version of white women-focused sex trafficking. Because also, I'm not exactly sure. Oh, yes. In Anna's question, she does specify. Oh, no, she specifies she's a white woman. But I feel like a lot of this kind of sex trafficking panic she's talking about is very
it's
like
targeted at
at white women. Targeted at white women. Which isn't new at all. And often, I think, is in service of reinforcing patriarchal masculinity, whether that is through laws or through men needing to be men to protect their trad wives.
Right. And you have to you need the safety of a man in order to survive. So you need to be within the family unit and you need to submit to your husband who will protect you and all of those different things. We could do like 17 episodes just unpacking everything that is happening here. Your description of that book makes me think of Go Ask Alice, which was also like a manufactured narrative to like scare kids straight because women had more like sexual freedom and latitude than any other point in American history. So it's like, oh, what should we do? We should publish this book that like I still read it. I devoured it years after it came out. Like everyone I knew had read it.
Anna's also spot on with the ultra-conservative and evangelical groups because I think it also it ties in so perfectly with the purity culture and just like straight up like fear of female sexuality and the power that it has over cisgender men, just like all of those kinds of toxic messages. And it's also another potent space too, where you can also get these kinds of uncanny alliances between, you know, an ultra conservative evangelical group and, you know, more like a mainstream feminist group, because who doesn't want to protect women and girls? You know, it's kind of that whole thing.
I always think that, like, because there's the overlap between, isn't it? There's an organization that is very legitimate called Save the Children.
Yes. Yeah.
That like Jennifer Garner is very involved in, right? And then there's another one that's like an anti-sex trafficking, like QAnon situation that had marches and that sort of thing. That is not that. And but that speaks to the overlap that you get, right? Between someone who just likes Jennifer Garner and someone who is suddenly like looking for signs of sex traffickers in their suburban mall parking lot.
And I think if anything, what it reflects, again, is that there is something, from my observations, I just think that there is a lot of like just gendered stuff baked into these kinds of conspiratorial spaces today, where it's really playing into whether it is like motherhood role or, you know, protecting women or men being
mama
men.
bear.
The mama bears, yes. So that's cut to me making a podcast because I want to understand it. I'm like making the inverse of unladylike.
No, and that's a fantastic place for us to actually segue into our Ask Anna Anything part of the show. So for this Ask Anna Anything part, we're going to actually try to be helpful to people. I think we've been helpful in contextualizing, but this is going to be a specific advice question, and this is from Michelle.
I'm often struck by my lack of ability to respond to conspiracy theories. Whether it's about medical issues or political misinformation, there's something inside me that was taught to be polite and not challenge when people say things that are completely out of pocket. I find myself doing the same thing when confronted by any dogma, including religious beliefs. I'm wondering if this is a common experience that has allowed conspiracy theories to flourish. What's an approach that would be appropriate for someone who comes at me with their research?
Oh, I don't have the answer to this one, but I would love to hear your thoughts.
I very much relate to this because, truth be told, Conspiracy She Wrote started because a not super close friend, but someone who I've like known long enough, presented me with a conspiracy theory, and I was agog. And like, I think I truly I asked her if she was a QAnoner. Like, I tried to kind of play it off as a joke. She wasn't joking, and I like found an exit. I didn't know what to say because it wasn't a space of like I had so many questions. I had no idea what she was talking about either.
Yep.
And I think that it is okay to not engage it if you don't need to. I mean,
I think it depends on the closeness of the friend,
yes,
right?
Yes.
Or the family member.
And
if
the
it's
setting.
someone that's like, if it's like a mom that you know from preschool, you know, it's like trying to talk to them about politics or like convincing them to change their political persuasion. Like that's not, you need intimacy in order to like have a real talk about that.
And I think that one thing that's really, really helpful to remember is that attempting to debunk conspiracy theories is a wasted effort. Not because facts are meaningless, but because conspiracy theories, by their nature, resist any kind of resolution.
Yeah.
So any kind of counter evidence or, anything to the contrary of what someone is presenting you can then just be twisted into either proof of a cover up or, you know what I mean? Like it's you're setting yourself up kind of to fail.
It's the brilliance of conspiracy theories is that they can accommodate anyone's counter argument. They're like, well, yeah, of course you would say that.
Right.
Of course. Or like, of course you believe that because this is what they want you to believe. There is space for that argument, that counter argument. And I think that like listening to what it is and then having conversations that aren't like, well, let me send you these 5 rebuttals or like, let me send you this Washington Post article about like 5 truths about vaccines, that sort of thing. That's not going to work. It's more I think thinking about, okay, what maybe made this person think in a conspiratorial way.
Yes.
And getting to that truth and then working up from there. And that requires a lot more work than like sending a link to like, look at this debunker. Right.
It requires a lot more work, and it is probably not your responsibility to do that work because just, again, by the nature of conspiracy theories, it's often something that people kind of have to like work out for themselves.
Right. Well, and a lot of things have had to happen in their lives and in their experience of the world to make them susceptible to this world belief.
Right.
So having one conversation with you is not going to change that world belief, right? So it has to be a longer, if it's something that feels very dangerous to you, then it has to be a much, like, it's like any sort of affliction or any sort of dangerous thinking. Like, if it matters, if it has consequences for you and your loved ones, like, you can't just ignore that.
Right.
But also, if it's something like, the person who asked us about their mom being interested in the aliens building the pyramids, like, that is not a clear and present danger to you and your loved ones, right?
Yeah. Alien mom, I'm not worried about. If we're talking about, say, your child's classmates' parent who is going off about, getting trans kids kicked off the school sports team. Yeah. Because, yes, like TERFs and transphobia, that stuff is so baked in conspiracy theories of trans agenda and brainwashing and all of this. And I think that is probably a space where there is kind of a direct harm happening.
Yes.
So some intervention is warranted. But if it's something that's just a bit more out there, if you know them well enough and have the interest and desire to find out, like, okay, what are the first 2 kind of facts that don't fit in your mind that kind of made this conspiracy theory necessary, that's where you can start unwinding things. Or at the very least, understand why they are thinking that.
Yeah. This is a great place to end. I'm so grateful for this conversation. I really, like, I feel like we have to have you on again, especially if as you get to more and more conspiracies on the podcast. So where can people find you on the internet, and what episode of the podcast do you recommend starting with? I mean, the first one, but like, what other ones are your favorites?
Well, thank you so much for having me. I have been so excited to come and talk to you about all of this. I hope it made sense. That's the thing about
Yes.
Good. Okay.
Yes.
Especially back in my corkboard days, I was like, I don't know if I'm losing it. People can find Conspiracy She Wrote everywhere they find podcasts. Please go listen. You can also find all of the episode sources. I cite my sources. I feel it's essential, especially for this podcast. You can find all of that information if you want to go deeper at conspiracyshrewrote.com. And you can also listen to the podcast on Ladylike if you don't want to hear about conspiracy theories.
They've listened all the way through the app and they're like, Nope, no conspiracy theories for me, but I'll take on Ladylike.
And as far as an episode to start with, episode 3, Taylor Swift Psyops, is a pretty rich text because we go into Taylor Swift's like weaponizing her into like a Nazi meme all the way into, and yes, I will say it out loud, Gaylor. We talk about it all. Go listen. That one's a lot of fun.
Amazing. Thank you so much. This has been great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to the Culture Study Podcast. Be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts because we have so many great episodes in the works, and I promise that you don't want to miss any of them. Some of the shows we're working on include What Happened to the Summer Blockbuster, a star image analysis of Nicole Kidman, trends on BookTok, and a continuation of our series on romance novels with a deep dive into queer romance. If you want to suggest a topic, ask a question about the culture that surrounds you, or submit a question for our subscriber-only advice time segment, go to our Google form at tinyurl.com/culturestudypod or check the show notes for a link. Today's episode is free for everyone, so if you like what you hear and you want to support the show and make it keep happening, head to culturestudypod.substack.com. It's just $5 a month or $50 a year, and you'll get ad-free episodes, the Ask Anne Anything segment, weekly discussion threads for each episode, and a link to a special Google form so that your questions go to the front of the line. And if you're already a subscriber to the Culture Study newsletter, search your email. You'll find a link that gives you a special deal, so go find that today. And if you're already a paid subscriber, head over to the discussion thread and keep the conversation going. For today, I would love to hear what your theory is about why certain groups of people are attracted to conspiracy theories. And also, what do you think about my theory that women are more likely to believe conspiracy theories because of patriarchy? I just want to see if I'm full of shit there. So discuss away. The Culture Study Podcast is produced by me, Anne Helen Peterson, and Melody Rowell. Our music is by Poddington Bear. You can find me on Instagram at Anne Helen Peterson, Melody at Melodious47, and the show at Culture Study Pod.
Wait, are you saying the Kate Middleton conspiracy was winter?
In my head, it's winter.
No, because the Photoshop picture was for Mother's Day.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it was spring. Sorry.
No, but it was British Mother's Day.
Which is still like March or April.
Hold on, let me look.
Because
I was
she
not
was
in my house
seen
though.
after Christmas, and then they were going to promise that she was going to resume like royal duties after Easter.
Okay, the release. No, I wrote the piece about it on March 13th.
You think that's the depth of winter?
Here it
okay,
is.
sorry. This is pointless. I'll edit this out. But you will hear it in the comments.